There are moments in life when someone enters your reality and the idea of coincidence simply stops making sense. You can try to trace back the events, analyze the steps, and rebuild the timeline in your mind. But deep down, you already sense that logic was never the real force behind it. Something else was at work. This person didn't just appear casually in your world, it felt like an arrival, something definite, something that shifted the atmosphere around your life the moment it happened. And from that point forward, something inside you changed in a way that cannot be undone. Quiet, but permanent. Even now, while you try to move forward, while you tell yourself the story is over, while you try to rationalize the distance, there is still something that keeps pulling your attention back. Not in a panicked or desperate way, but in a way that feels like recognition, as if something in you remembers them even when your mind tries not to. If this message has reached you, it doesn't feel random for a reason. Meaningful things often show up exactly when something within a person becomes ready to understand them. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And in this moment, something within you is quietly waking up to a feeling you can't fully ignore anymore. It may feel like you are standing at a divide within yourself. One part of you wants to let go, to accept distance, to close the door. Another part still feels connected, still senses meaning, still questions whether what you felt was ever truly explainable or just imagined. Silence has a way of creating doubt. Distance can distort clarity. It can make even the strongest emotions feel uncertain. You may have questioned yourself, wondering if you felt too deeply or gave meaning to something that was never real. But illusions usually fade with time. They don't continue to echo inside the heart the way this does. Something about this connection did not dissolve, even under pressure, even under time, even under emotional struggle. Instead of fading, it left traces, and those traces continue to bring you back into reflection, back into feeling, back into awareness of this person in a way you cannot fully control. This is not obsession. Obsession is loud, restless, and chaotic. What you are experiencing is quieter than that. It exists beneath thought, beneath analysis. It surfaces in stillness, in unexpected emotions, in moments when your mind is not trying to search for anything at all. When you first crossed paths with this person, something within you responded instantly. Not just attraction, not just interest, but recognition. A sense that feels older than explanation. As if something in you already knew something about them before logic had a chance to intervene. Even simple interactions carried weight. The energy between you was not ordinary. It carried both comfort and intensity at the same time, a combination that is rare and often unforgettable. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And transformation is exactly what happens in these kinds of connections. Neither person remains untouched by it. Even in separation, something continues to exist beneath the surface. Distance does not always mean emotional absence. In many cases, it simply means emotions that are too complex, too intense, or too unprocessed to be expressed clearly. Sometimes people step back, not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much and do not know how to hold it. And in that retreat, silence becomes their way of coping with what they cannot fully understand within themselves. You may have felt that contradiction, the sense that something real existed, yet was not fully expressed. The feeling that what was between you still lingers, even if it was never fully defined. There are internal struggles people carry that they rarely show outwardly. Old fears, emotional wounds, resistance to vulnerability, and the fear of losing control can all shape how someone responds to depth. Love, for some, does not feel safe at first, it feels revealing. And when something within them is awakened by another person, it can create discomfort instead of closeness. Not because the connection is wrong, but because it reflects parts of themselves they have not yet faced. In those moments, withdrawal becomes a form of self-protection. Not necessarily from you, but from what you awaken in them. Carl Jung referred to this when he said that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will guide your life and you will call it fate. And that is often what happens in connections like this. One person begins to see more clearly, while the other is still being shaped by what they have not yet understood within themselves. But awareness, once triggered, does not disappear easily. What has been seen cannot be unseen. What has been felt does not simply vanish because of distance. You may notice that this connection changed something in you as well. Your awareness became sharper. Your emotional depth expanded. You became less tolerant of shallow interactions and more sensitive to what feels real and aligned. That shift is not accidental. Some connections arrive not to complete a story immediately, but to awaken something within you that was previously dormant, to show you what emotional truth feels like when it is present, even if briefly. And even now, in the quiet, in the unanswered space, in the uncertainty, something is still unfolding internally. Not visibly, not predictably, but in subtle emotional movement beneath the surface. This is not about forcing outcomes or chasing resolution. It is about recognizing that meaningful connections often evolve in ways the mind cannot predict or control. The heart understands timing in a different way than logic does. What you are moving through is not simply waiting, it is transformation. And in transformation, both people are being shaped, even if the process is invisible from the outside. So as this settles within you, pay attention not to anxiety, but to clarity. Because what is real does not need to be forced into certainty. It is felt quietly, consistently, and deeply. And in that quiet recognition, something within you already understands more than words can explain. Once that inner awakening has taken place, there is no real way to return to the version of you that existed before it. Even if the person is no longer present in your life, what they activated inside you continues to live. It stays awake. It keeps shaping how you see, feel, and understand yourself. This is exactly why letting go feels so difficult right now. Not because you are simply attached to a person, but because you are still in contact with a deeper truth about yourself that was uncovered through this connection. You discovered how deeply you can feel, how open your heart can become, how much emotional presence and devotion exists within you. And once that level of inner expansion is reached, it does not simply disappear on command. Naturally, doubt still rises at times. Thoughts like, if this was real, wouldn't it feel easier? Or, if they truly cared, wouldn't they show it clearly, begin to appear? These questions make sense to the rational mind, because the rational mind tries to measure emotional depth using logic, timing, and visible proof. But what you are dealing with does not move in a straight line like that. Experiences of this nature rarely unfold in a direct, predictable way. They move in cycles. They revisit the same emotional themes, but each time at a deeper level, asking for more awareness, more honesty, and more emotional maturity. It is not repetition without purpose. It is unfolding through layers. What makes this connection feel so complex is not the absence of feeling, but the difference in readiness. On your side, there is openness, awareness, and willingness to feel. On their side, there may still be internal hesitation, unresolved emotions, or fears they have not fully confronted yet. Readiness is not something one person can transfer to another. It has to be reached internally, through personal emotional growth. There can be moments where they come close to reaching out. Moments where your presence enters their thoughts more strongly than they expect. Moments where a message is almost sent, then stopped. Not because the feeling is missing, but because fear interrupts it. Fear of vulnerability, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, fear of reopening emotional territory they are not fully prepared to handle. And so silence becomes their temporary shield. Meanwhile, unresolved connections do not dissolve easily. They tend to resurface in quiet moments when distraction fades. In those spaces, memories return without effort. Your presence becomes something they cannot fully erase from awareness. Not as obsession, but as recognition of something that once felt meaningful and still carries emotional weight. This is also why certain signs, memories, or unexpected reminders may seem to appear around you, not as forces pulling you backward, but as subtle anchors that keep you connected to your own inner knowing. A song that resonates too precisely, a dream that feels emotionally real, a sudden memory that arrives with clarity instead of confusion. These experiences are less about prediction and more about reflection. mirrors of what still lives within your emotional field. What begins to form through all of this is a very important inner shift. You start to distinguish attachment from alignment. Attachment says, I need this to feel whole. Alignment says, I am already whole and whatever is meant for me will meet me without force. That distinction quietly changes everything about how you hold this connection. When you stop chasing clarity and instead begin to embody stability within yourself, the dynamic naturally changes. The emotional pressure softens, the urgency fades. What remains is something more grounded, more centered, and less driven by anxiety. And in that state, if anything is meant to return, it does so on healthier terms, not through confusion or emotional imbalance. Because if a reconnection happens while you are still depleted, uncertain, or emotionally dependent, it would likely repeat old patterns. But if it happens when you are steady, self-aware, and emotionally grounded, then something entirely different becomes possible. Something more balanced, more mutual, and more conscious. This is not about punishment or delay. It is about inner preparation. You are being shaped into a version of yourself that can hold love without losing self-respect inside it. A version of you that can recognize real effort instead of clinging to potential. A version that no longer confuses intensity with alignment. And even if they cannot articulate it clearly, they feel this shift too. They sense the change in how accessible your energy feels. They sense that you are no longer holding on in the same way. And paradoxically, that shift makes your presence feel more real to them, because it is no longer something guaranteed or taken for granted. When something is no longer assumed, it becomes noticeable again. It becomes something that must be chosen, not expected. And that awareness often brings emotional weight with it. Memories become sharper. Regret becomes more visible. Feelings that were previously avoided begin to surface in quieter moments. You may notice your own emotional state changing in waves. At times, there is calm acceptance, even detachment. At other times, emotion rises unexpectedly. This fluctuation is part of internal realignment. It is the mind and heart adjusting to a new internal balance where you are no longer fully merged with longing, but also not disconnected from care. This is where emotional transformation begins to stabilize. You are no longer resisting what you feel, but you are also no longer losing yourself inside it. That balance is significant. It reflects a deeper shift from emotional dependency into emotional awareness. From this space, your perspective naturally changes. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And slowly begin to sense, what is this teaching me? That shift is subtle, but it is powerful. It turns confusion into understanding and emotional intensity into inner growth. What you are moving through is not just waiting, it is becoming. Something within you is reorganizing itself at a deeper level. Old emotional patterns are loosening. Inner clarity is forming, and your sense of self is strengthening in ways that may not yet be fully visible, but are already in motion. As this continues, you may find that your thoughts of this person change in quality. They become less frantic, less consuming. They arrive with more calmness, sometimes with understanding, sometimes with acceptance. This is emotional maturity taking shape inside you. And when one part of a dynamic evolves, the entire dynamic begins to shift. Emotional systems naturally seek balance. When your energy is no longer rooted in chasing or uncertainty, it begins to stabilize the entire field between you in a different way. What once felt confusing starts to settle. What once felt distant starts to feel more defined, even without direct contact. But importantly, this does not require you to act, pursue, or force outcomes. Your role now is simply to remain aligned with yourself. Silence, in this context, is no longer just absence. It becomes a space of reflection for both sides. A space where unspoken emotions are processed, where internal questions are faced, where personal truths slowly rise to the surface. There may be internal conflict within them, moments of wanting to reach out, followed by hesitation. This push and pull is not about your worth. It is about their internal readiness to face what connection with you represents for them emotionally. And what matters most for you now is understanding this. The direction of your life is not defined by waiting, but by alignment. The more you stay grounded in your own truth, the more clarity naturally emerges around what belongs in your life and what does not. Whether this connection returns in a new form or not, you will not remain stuck in the same emotional place. Because what is truly changing here is you, not because it needs drama, but because it demands honesty. What was never said out loud, what was felt but not fully expressed, what was postponed out of fear, none of it simply disappears. It does not dissolve just because time moves forward or silence takes over. It lingers in the background of emotional awareness, waiting for courage to finally meet it without distortion. Carl Jung once said, "Where your fear is, there your task lies." And in many ways, that is exactly what is unfolding here. Fear is not just an emotion sitting quietly inside this connection. It becomes the invisible thread running through it. It shapes timing, distance, words left unsaid, and the decisions to approach or withdraw. It stands in the middle of closeness, asking to be acknowledged instead of avoided, understood instead of projected onto. Your task has been to stay connected to what you feel without losing your sense of self inside it. Their task has been to face what they feel without retreating into silence, distraction, or emotional distance. Neither of these tasks is simple, and neither one can be rushed by pressure or expectation. They unfold slowly, through inner confrontation rather than external force, through awareness rather than reaction, through truth rather than assumption. And somewhere along the way, something subtle begins to happen inside you. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is a quiet shift in perception. You start to notice that you are no longer emotionally gripping the idea of reunion in the same way you once were. The urgency is not as sharp. The fantasy is not as consuming. The waiting does not define your emotional state as much as it used to. Not because your feelings disappeared, but because your awareness expanded. You are beginning to see more clearly what was once filtered through hope, fear, and imagination. You are no longer only feeling the connection, you are observing it. You are no longer willing to confuse uncertainty with destiny. You want clarity. You want presence. You want effort that is real, visible, and consistent, not effort that has to be decoded, guessed, or imagined in your mind to feel real. And this shift is important because it is not closing your heart. It is refining your standard for what can stay in your emotional life. Many people misunderstand deep emotional experiences. They assume that intensity equals truth, that pain equals depth, that confusion equals meaning. But real emotional connection does not exist to keep you in a constant state of inner tension. It exists to bring you closer to clarity, even if that clarity is uncomfortable at first. If a bond is real, it does not require you to abandon yourself in order to maintain it. It does not ask you to silence your needs just to preserve its existence. It does not survive on imbalance alone. Instead, it naturally guides you back to yourself first, before it brings you toward another person. And when that happens, your perception begins to shift again. You may notice moments where everything feels less emotionally charged, where thoughts of them arrive without the same heaviness, where memories exist without pulling you backward. That is not indifference forming. That is your nervous system slowly leaving survival mode and returning to balance. There may even be moments where communication feels closer again in some form. A message that feels unexpected, a tone that feels softer, a brief exchange that carries more presence than before, or even without direct contact, a sense that the emotional distance is no longer as sharp as it once felt. But what matters most now is not rushing toward meaning in those moments. Authentic connection cannot be forced into timing. It cannot be accelerated by hope or delayed by fear. It unfolds only when both people are internally ready to meet it with honesty instead of avoidance. And readiness cannot be performed, it must be lived internally. If fear rises again within you, the fear of hoping again, the fear of reopening emotional space, the fear of disappointment, observe it without letting it take control of your direction. That fear is not insight, it is memory. It is your system remembering what once hurt, not predicting what must happen next. You are not who you were when this began. You are more grounded now, even if you do not always feel it. More self-aware, more emotionally literate, less willing to trade inner peace for emotional uncertainty. That transformation does not need to be announced or proven. It is already visible in the way you now relate to love itself. Real love does not require you to shrink yourself to make it fit. It does not ask you to question your worth repeatedly just to feel chosen. It does not survive only in moments of confusion, silence, or emotional guessing. Because of this, your inner standard has quietly changed shape. It now acts like a filter, allowing in what feels clear and gently removing what cannot sustain clarity. And that changes everything in a subtle but irreversible way. Because when you stop overextending yourself to hold something together, the connection is no longer maintained by imbalance. It is forced into truth. It either evolves into something mutual, grounded, and conscious, or it reveals where it cannot grow beyond its current form. Neither outcome is punishment. Both are clarity. You may already feel this shift in how you think and feel. The emotional grip is less tight. The urgency is not controlling your inner world in the same way. Thoughts of them may still come, but they arrive with more space around them, sometimes even with calm. That is not emotional shutdown. That is balance returning after intensity. And from that balance, something very important becomes available again: discernment. You are no longer reacting from urgency or emotional fear. You are observing from awareness. You are not trying to decode every silence or overinterpret every signal. You are simply seeing more clearly what is present and what is not. At this stage, love is no longer something you chase out of fear of loss, nor something you cling to out of emotional scarcity. It becomes something you recognize through consistency, presence, and alignment. Something that either meets you where you are or does not enter your life in a sustainable way at all. This is where inner strength begins to feel quiet but steady. You no longer need constant reassurance to stay grounded in your intuition. Something inside you has stopped negotiating with confusion. It has settled into a deeper kind of knowing. And from that knowing, you begin to see the connection differently. Not as a puzzle you must solve, not as a test you must pass, but as an experience that reflected you back to yourself. It showed you your depth. It showed you where you gave too much. It showed you where you abandoned your own needs in the name of emotional hope. And it showed you what you are no longer willing to repeat. That is why everything feels different now. Not because the connection has been erased, but because your relationship to it has transformed at the core. There may still be movement beneath the surface of things, moments of reflection on their side, moments of awareness that arrive slowly, moments where silence feels heavier than it used to. But none of that requires you to lose yourself again in anticipation. If anything real exists between you, it will not demand self-abandonment. It will require presence from both sides, accountability from both sides, emotional truth from both sides. Anything less than that is not depth. It is imbalance repeating itself in a different form. And if it does return in some way, it will not feel like emotional chaos restarting. It will feel clearer, slower, more grounded, less driven by fear, longing, or uncertainty, and more guided by awareness and choice. But even if it does not return in the form you once imagined, you will not collapse into loss the way you once might have, because something irreversible has already taken place inside you. You have gained emotional awareness. You have developed inner stability. You can now distinguish between attachment that pulls you into confusion and alignment that brings you back to yourself. You are no longer operating from emptiness that needs to be filled. You are operating from wholeness that observes, chooses, and discerns. And from that place, everything changes. Love that belongs in your life will not require you to disappear in order for it to exist. It will recognize your presence without asking you to reduce it. And what cannot meet you there will naturally fall away, not as loss, but as clarity revealing itself over time. So what remains now is not waiting in the old sense. It is living with awareness. It is allowing truth to surface without forcing it, without distorting it, and without abandoning yourself in the process of hoping. Because at the deepest level, this was never only about another person arriving or not arriving. It was about you becoming someone who no longer leaves herself behind in order to be loved.